Hey, what's up, guys? What's going on? This is the first episode ever of the Spun Today podcast, episode numero uno. Thank you very much for listening. First and foremost, to the half a dozen of you that might eventually listen to this, probably by mistake and or while you're falling asleep or something like that. Thank you nonetheless. Second of all, the sound quality. I want to address that immediately. Because it probably sounds like shit. The reason for that is that I'm recording this first podcast on my iPhone, not on the program that comes, like the stock recording program that comes with the iPhone, but some other program that I downloaded called Voice Record, which seems to be decent. It's free. It's a free download. But yet, in the future, eventually I want to upgrade this little get up here to a halfway decent, respectable podcast. You know, get a couple SM52 microphones and a mixer and the whole nine. But for now, again, sorry, sounds like shit. Now, in terms of length, I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to be doing yet. For now, I definitely want to keep it under an hour or within an hour. We'll go through this first run and see how it goes, pretty much. And if you stumbled across the podcast without first stumbling onto my website, spuntoday.com, pretty much what I'm going to use this podcast for, or the purpose of it, as I see it right now, is that I want to use it in conjunction with my website, which is geared towards just writing and certain things that I'm dabbling with, that I'm interested in, and taking general steps towards. I'm also a huge podcast fan, a huge self-proclaimed podcast junkie. I absolutely love the medium. I feel, and really feel, that it's the medium of the future. How exactly that's going to roll out and play out, not too sure, but it's such an awesome thing. There's so much diversity, something for everybody. They are absolutely amazing. Love them. If podcasts were a drug, like, I'd have to be admitted somewhere, because I literally listen to nonstop podcasts, many of which I am going to go over. That's one of the things I want to do with this first up podcast, just, a list kind of some of the podcasts I listen to that I have on my phone now, and what I think of them, I guess. Just an extension of a section, actually, of my website. Under the Ode to Podcasts tab, there's a drop-down list of some of the podcasts that I listen to, where I have written certain excerpts, I guess you can call them, from these podcasts that have resonated with me in some form or another, and I literally wrote them down verbatim. Certain things that I found deep, or certain things that I found funny, something that just resonated with me for whatever reason. There's, a couple dozen there, and I don't know, I feel like it's just an interesting thing, or a hook, if you will, for certain people that might read it and say, oh shit, that sounds pretty cool. And I timestamp him. So, for example, I'll take an excerpt from the middle of some random podcast, and I'll let you know what the exact time is on, or the remaining time is on the podcast timestamp thing, that, or where rather, the excerpt actually begins. So, you could click on it. It takes you right to the site of said podcast, and then you can listen for yourself in the full context of, whatever, little excerpt or piece that I took out and resonated with me. So if you are interested in, some of the. So if you're interested in reading about a few different types of podcasts, or you're looking for a new podcast to listen to, go through there. Again, it's on spuntoday.com, SPUN today.com. The section that it's in is Ode to Podcasts, and read a few, see if what you read resonates with you, and then go listen to those podcasts and enjoy. So essentially what that section comes to be is pretty much representative of my concept or idea, I guess, with this podcast, which is like a synergy or a fusion of writing and podcast. I enjoy, both mediums to the max, and, this is my attempt at combining those, see if they mix, I guess. Now, that's one section within the website. Another one, in terms of, like, the type of writing I like to do, is mainly, like, 99% free writing. It's literally, like, if any of you ever, like, listened to, or I'm sure you like, know the concept or idea of, like, a rap battle or something like that. It's free writing is pretty much like freestyling, except you're doing it with a pen and paper. You literally sit down with the pen and paper. You could have something predetermined, right? At least this is how I do it, or whatever, or my explanation of what free writing is. You could go into it with a certain mentality or idea or mindset of what you want to write about, what you want to work out in your mind, or you could not, and just sit down and have literally absolutely zero to even thinking about, and just literally let the pen flow and write the first thing that comes to mind. And it's pretty awesome. It's pretty therapeutic. It's cathartic. It's awesome. I enjoy doing it, and it's fun. I recommend it. So try that out. I have a section, like, I have a lot of free writing that I've been doing for a long time, but what I have up now in the section is a style of free writing, not just straight random free writes. This is the ones that are there now are quotes that I read in books, or that I've seen somewhere that I like, and that inspired me to free write, basically. Not because they were speaking to free writing, just something that I read where I'm like, oh shit, that's pretty cool. I like that, and inspired me in some way and made me free write. So in that section, under the free writing section, you'll see, like, the format of it is pretty much, you will see the quote that I'm referring to that inspired me to made me want to free write something, then followed by whatever what I free wrote. Then there's usually a timestamp also as to, like, when I originally wrote it, because all of these are done with the pen and paper by hand. I just transcribe them to put them in a digital format, obviously. And that's what that section is. So it's like a bunch of quotes, which are actually in red, if you see it. And everything on the website that's in red, or pretty much everything, like all, like, text and stuff like that, when you click on it, it takes you to the respective website. Like, for example, with the podcast examples I was speaking about in the Ode to Podcast section, if you click on one of the timestamps, it'll take you to the website of where that specific episode is of that podcast, and the timestamp lets you know where to fast forward it to, so that you can listen to exactly the excerpt that I typed out. Similarly, in this section, in the free writing section, you will have quotes that are usually, like, from a book or something like that, or maybe it's from a show. Like, I know I have one scene or quote, scene, I guess you could call it, from Jerry Seinfeld's Comedian in Cars Getting Coffee. So, like, that link of that quote or that scene links to, his webisode thing, or, from different books, like a quote from a book. It'll link to my Amazon link and to a copy of the respective book, where, if you guys like the quote that much that you're like, I want to read the rest of the book that this quote is found in or something like that, feel free to click on that. It'll take you straight to Amazon. And you could use my Amazon link, which actually helps me out here with the podcast, because Amazon has this affiliate program thing with podcasters and I guess like blog sites and stuff like that, where you can pretty much set up an account. Anybody that clicks through your page to go to them and shop, they give it like a referral fee too of a couple cents on the dollar. So, definitely that'll help if you want to do that. And that would be much appreciated. Now, aside from that, there is another section. Now, full disclosure, what type of writer I would want to be, I have no idea, to be honest. Aside from the fact that I'm completely drawn to free writing, there's no specific genre or style or, anything that's like, I want to go be a sports writer or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, nothing pulling me in any particular direction. So I enjoy doing the podcast thing because obviously my enjoyment and respect for podcasts and the free writing, I incorporate it that way, like with the quotes and stuff like that. I enjoy doing those things very much. But there's also my really lame, probably, shitty attempt at writing stories. There's a short story section. There's, I believe, 3 on there right now. 3 short stories that I've written. Enjoy them, or try to, at least, if you decide to read them. They're not that long. One of them is actually kind of long. I think it's like 4,500 words, 5,000 words or something like that. The other 2 are like around 1,500. So, they're not long at all. Probably shitty, but not long. So at least it won't, the pain won't be too grueling or last too long. If you guys want to check those out. And any and all, positive criticisms or even negative criticisms, I guess, about them are welcome. I'm sure I could pick out nuggets of something useful from the negative ones if they come my way. So yeah, there's a full comment section within each story. You could like, you could comment, and or you could email me through the contact page, which would be pretty cool. And that's pretty much it in terms of the writing. Now, then we have another section, which is photography. No, I don't have one of those fancy, long lens DSLR cameras and stuff like that, although they look cool as shit, but they're really expensive, and I like taking pictures, but I'm not a photography guru, by like any stretch of the imagination. But I do enjoy taking pictures. I am that guy that takes a picture of a random Coke can on the floor that's halfway crushed, and somebody will be like, "What the fuck are you taking a picture of?" And I'll probably be like, "I don't know." I just felt like taking a picture. But yeah, I enjoy taking pictures. Some of them actually come out pretty nice. Like, nice to me is, that'll make a fat screensaver on my computer or desktop background or whatever. And yeah, I enjoy them, so they're on there. I'm sharing them. You could also, I think every page has all the way down at the bottom, you can click on the logos for the respective social media sites, Instagram, Twitter, and stuff like that. Click on those. It'll take you straight to my pages for those, and you can follow, like, pictures and shit like that. Obviously, I'm sure if you guys know what a podcast is, you know what Twitter and Instagram is, so, or are. definitely check us out on there. Spun Today on Instagram and Spun Today on Twitter as well. And there's a Facebook page that I think I created once and I haven't been back on since. So I gotta figure out what to do with that more. I just don't use it like that, I guess. And then lastly, like I mentioned before, the contact/donate page. There's an Amazon link there, and it works the same way as the Amazon links on the free writing section, where you can click on the quotes and it takes you to the Amazon page. This banner that's at the top of the contact donate page, you can click on the banner and it does the same thing. It takes you straight to Amazon, and anything you shop for, Amazon gives me a referral fee of a couple cents, literally a couple cents, 2 or 3 cents I think it is on the dollar, and that could help go towards the respectable Spun Today podcast studio. So eventually, sometime in the future, any shopping done through there would be much appreciated. Then there's just the rest of the contact page. There's like a pre-boxed form, like question form thing that you can fill out your name, your email address, your subject, and the message. Click submit, and it goes straight to my email, which is spuntoday@gmail.com, which is also there on the contact sheet. You can email me, obviously, through your own email thing. Use that email address, and both go to the exact same place. And that's pretty much it in terms of the website. Enjoy. And again, any feedback would be awesome. All feedback is welcome, and I hope you guys enjoy. Now, what I want to do actually with future episodes of the podcast is the shitty short stories that are on the site. I actually want to read them out, kind of like an audiobook, like you would listen to an Audible or wherever you listen to audiobooks. If you haven't listened to any, I recommend. It's pretty cool. I enjoy it. Yeah, that's something. Maybe I'll do like 3 separate episodes. Get some content under the Spun Today podcast belt, and that's definitely an idea for a couple future episodes. I was also thinking of maybe within each episode reading some of the free writing stuff, which there's plenty on there now, and I'll probably be doing that. But for now, I wanted to begin with the podcasts that I listen to, the podcasts that are on my iPhone that I'm using to record this podcast. So I'm literally on it now. I'm going to start at the top, and first and foremost is the Joe Rogan Experience. That is literally the first podcast that I ever listened to. I don't know ever, but the first time I ever decided, let me go figure out, what the fuck a podcast is. I keep hearing this term podcast. I don't know what it is. Is it radio? Is it, what is it? So, I located podcasts. I think I listened to 1 or 2, like 2 or 3 minutes of each. And I was like, oh, okay. They were like news-related podcasts, I think. Like one was like the White House fucking podcast or press release podcast or whatever. And a couple like financial ones, I think. And then I bumped into the Joe Rogan Experience, and I was like, oh shit, that's the guy from UFC. The commentator dude. Let me listen to it. And the first episode that I listened to, I forgot which number it was. It's 180 something or 190 something. And it was with Ari Shaffir. I do remember that. And it was awesome. Like, I literally listened intently for 3 hours straight. And it was, well, actually not straight, because I was on the subway on my way to work. I listened to, like, I guess half hour, 45 minutes of it. And then the next chance I got, I listened to it pretty much in 2 sittings. On my way to work, and then on my way back from work, and whatever. It was awesome. And since then, I've literally listened to every single episode There's like 500 something episodes, 530 something he's up to now. And each of them is like 3 hours long. Not even on average, like most of them are literally 3 hours long. And I've listened to every single one since then. Have not missed one at all. And I've even gone back to episode 1, literally episode number 1, and have listened to all the ones that I missed from 1 to 192 or whatever episode was that first episode that I listened to with Ari Shafir. And it's awesome, man. Not to sound like too much of a fanboy, but Joe Rogan's an awesome dude, super inspirational. It's funny as fuck. Has a vast, huge, disparate, a bunch of different types of guests on the show, all of which is like, oh shit. I'm actually into listening to a 3-hour podcast about coffee, literally, and the origins of it, and how their beans are roasted and ferment and this and that, and listen to a 3-hour podcast with an Egyptologist or one of the many stand-up comics which have me dying laughing all the time that he has on, or astrophysicists like Neil deGrasse Tyson and other scientists like Amit Goswami, and just awesome guys, really entertaining. And because of that podcast, actually, that's where I first heard of The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, which kind of unlocked the underlying passion towards writing that I have. And obviously I'm grateful for that. That's a direct connection there from the podcast, which is awesome. And a bunch of different documentaries that have been mentioned there that I'm like, oh shit, that sounds interesting. And or news articles or movies, books, stuff like that. A bunch of stuff that has come from there. That's pretty cool. So definitely check that out. That's the Joe Rogan Experience. Then from there, not all, but most of the other podcasts that I listen to came from there. Our guests that have gone on there, a bunch of comics, which I'll mention, that, have their own podcast, or, just other people that have their own podcast. And I like them as a guest and decided to listen to their podcast, and their podcasts were actually good as well. And, I'd listen to those also. And I'll mention a few. One is, I guess it's not a specific podcast. It's more of, the Death Squad Network. Brian Redband, which I heard from Joe Rogan's podcast. Obviously, Brian and Joe obviously started the Jerry podcast together. Brian's the engineer, mastermind, computer dude. And he also has this Death Squad network of miscellaneous other podcasts, some of which I listen to, not all. I like Pointless with Kevin Pereira. That one's pretty good. The Ice House Chronicles is awesome. That is such a sick concept. It's so fucking cool. It's pretty much the green room, or the side back room where all the comics hang out before they go on stage, before they do what they do their comedy. And it's picture a tape recorder in that room, or being a fly in the wall in that room, with all the comics just chilling, drinking, shooting the shit, hanging out with each other. And there's a podcast of that, and it's pretty cool. They'll go on stage, and they'll be talking shit, speaking with each other about whatever, doing a podcast, completely random, off the dome. And then they're like, oh, you're up, you're on stage next, you have to go up, do your time, then they do their spots, their workout spots, or whatever it is that they're doing that night. And it's pretty cool. It's pretty fun. I like that one a lot. Another one that I listen to is the Drunken Taoist podcast, and that is with Daniele Bolelli and Rich Avers. I don't know why I just said his name like that. But Daniele Bolelli is a guest that I first heard on Rogan's podcast also. And the Drunken Taoist podcast, which he does together with Rich Avers, is a bi-monthly podcast. Once every 2 weeks, an episode comes out. Since he began his podcast, I've listened to every single episode as well. They're about an hour long, I believe, hour and a half. And they're really cool. There's different segments, like 3 or 4 segments within each episode. One is a long, usually insightful, sometimes funny rant that Daniele does, and some of them are there's a couple segments within it about dreams that he has and stuff like that. He's a writer. I think I connect with him more on that level, and it seems both of them, Daniele and Rich, seem like really cool dudes, and I enjoy their podcast. They do interviews also with some good guests that I enjoy as well, and that's another one to check out, definitely, the Drunken Taoist podcast. And Daniele he's also a professor also, so he has that I could listen to this guy type of vibe, so it's pretty cool. I enjoy it. Brian Callen's podcast is another one that I listen to that I really like. Brian Callen, he's a funny fuck and super smart. I find him super smart. I hear him on Rogan's podcast all the time. They get into some of the deepest, most interesting conversations that I've heard on the podcast. One of he's definitely top 5, or maybe even higher than that. He also has his podcast called The Brian Callen Show. I know he has another one with what's this guy's name from the UFC? It's called The Fighter and the Kid. They do I think I haven't listened to it, to be honest, but what I know of it is that it's fight related, UFC related. And Brendan Schaub, that's his name. He's cool. Seems like a cool dude also. Obviously I don't know any of them personally, but he's been on Rogan's podcast also, and seems like a cool dude. But the podcast that I do listen to with Brian Callen is called The Brian Callen Show, so it'll be easy to remember. He has a lot of intellectual types on his podcast, which seem, I like hearing those types of conversations, I guess. You see if I pick something up, intellectualize myself, and sometimes you learn shit. It's pretty cool. It has a lot of writers on there. I enjoy listening to it. It's funny. Hunter Mott's really cool dude. Also super, 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 and 10 more super smarts, or smart rather. I think he went to Harvard or something like that. One of those woo-woo schools. But really super smart sounding dude. Really insightful. So check that one out. That's the Brian Callen Show. Then another podcast, switching gears a bit, is, again, like I told you guys, there's a shitload of different types of podcasts. There's something for everybody. So there's, everything's not just comedy or comedy related. There's a lot out there. So the next one that I listen to is, or another one rather, that I listen to is the Motley Fool, Market Foolery. It's like a stock investing type of podcast. It's pretty cool. It's not long at all. It's definitely digestible. It's like a rotating. There's one main host, and they're all of which work for the Motley Fool, obviously, and there are 3 or 4 other financial analyst dudes that rotate in as guests, and they are about through 4 episodes, I want to say, a week. Each is not more than half an hour, usually around 15, 20, 25 minute mark, and they go over the top headline financial news, things of the day or of the day before, how the market's doing, different stocks and stock picks and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. I enjoy that type of shit sometimes. Next is Joey motherfucking Coco Diaz from the Church of What's Happening Now podcast. That's Joey Diaz, the Church of What's Happening Now podcast. I actually had the pleasure of meeting Joey Diaz yesterday at the Gotham Comedy Club. Had a really awesome time. I went with my brother and a friend of mine, and we had an awesome time. Class act guy. He really is as down to earth and chill as, at least from shaking his hand and taking a picture with him, that the vibe that I got from him. And just like you could pick up, I think you could pick up shit like that from people by, I guess, like first impressions kind of thing. Like he came into the comedy club, walked in, there was a really long line, out the door line, and he came in, saying what's up to everybody on the way in, put his stuff down, his bags or whatever, came back out. He didn't have to do that. Shook like almost everybody's hand that wanted to, thanked us for coming and stuff like that. And the actual show was great. It was funny as shit. We had a really good time. Then afterwards, he stood there, took pictures with everybody and anybody that wanted to take pictures with him. It was a really good time. It wasn't like a rush kind of thing. You were able to say, what's up to him, tell him you like the podcast, and tell him to tell Lee Sayet, his guy that he does his podcast with, the Flying Jew as he calls him. Tell him what's up and stuff like that, and it was a really cool time. Definitely check that one out. It is on every, I want to say Monday and Wednesday, twice a week, about like an hour and a half long or something like that. It's funny as shit. He's motivating and a cool dude. And a real dude, more importantly. Then another podcast that I listen to is the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. The Duncan Trussell Family Hour. Duncan Trussell is another stand-up comic, which I have not seen yet, but I definitely want to. I heard him first on Rogan's podcast as well, and him and Joe Rogan have some of the deepest, like in a trippy way, like trippiest, psychedelic type of ill conversations that I have ever heard or thought of hearing. And sometimes I'm in the mood for that type of shit, and it's really cool. And he's a funny dude, and I enjoy listening to his podcast as well, so definitely check that one out. His guests, I want to say, gear more towards well, he's a stand-up comic, so there, he definitely has comics on there. There's like funny content and stuff like that, but he's also like more like spiritual, I want to say, even though he definitely probably wouldn't use that word to describe himself for his podcast. But I don't want to say he is, but the vibe that I get, the general vibe that I get from his podcast, aside from enjoyment, is like a trippy, heady, kind of spiritual, loving, friendly type of vibe, and it's pretty cool. Definitely check it out. Next is Ari Shafir's Skeptic Tank. Ari Shafir is another stand-up comic who is blowing the fuck up. If you don't know him by now, you absolutely will. He is the first episode of the Joe Rogan podcast that I mentioned earlier, the Joe Rogan Experience. The first episode ever that I heard of it was with him, with Ari Shafir. And him I also had the pleasure of meeting, but I was too much of a bitch to ask him for a picture, because it wasn't like that type of setting, I guess. It was like after his set, he was like hanging out in the bar, and I, pretty much just went up to him, told him I liked the podcast, shook his hand. He was a really cool dude, really nice. He didn't seem like, oh, fuck, leave me alone, guy. He didn't have like that type of mentality. I saw him at New York Stand, I want to say. I think that's where, or one of the places where he does his sets. And, really nice guy, from the few seconds I was there. And he was like the perfect balance, I think, on that day to Joe Rogan. And like together they made that podcast like epic to me. And he's been on it a bunch of other times more, and he's definitely one of my favorite guests on the Joe Rogan Experience. He's like a recurring guest on there. So is Duncan Trussell, so is Joey Diaz. Daniele Bolelli's been there a couple times also. And they're definitely my top favorites of recurring guests on the show. But Ari's probably definitely number one. And his podcast, The Skeptic Tank, is really good also. The vibe that I get from him is that he's like completely real. Like he's completely candid about shit. And, whether not, something might be like, oh, damn, I wouldn't even like think about saying that, but I was thinking that, you know what I mean? So it's comforting, like listening to someone like that, I think, and humbling in a weird way. And it's like, oh shit, yeah, I was thinking that exact same thing, but I probably wouldn't have said it, which is pretty cool. So I enjoy that type of realism, which is I think like an underlying theme of all the podcasts that I listen to that I really like. I know there's podcasts out there, and probably some of these that I've mentioned that have like some sort of or some amount of editing to them, and like bleeping shit and cutting stuff out and not cursing and some sort of like censoring, I guess. But for the most part, they're not. They're like, for example, the Joe Rogan Experience. I know they do it completely live. It streams like almost instantly, and on the Ustream, those live streams, I've seen a couple and parts of a couple more live, but I know that the recorded version that I listen to, the audio version, which is what, if I'm not mistaken, most of his fans listen to, by far, actually. I know I'm not mistaken. They say that all the time, or he says it all the time, rather. You're getting that exact same copy of that first live, audio stream. That raw and authentic feel that a podcast has, or at least the ones that I enjoy most, is what I'm striving for with this one, actually, which is why I'm pretty sure I'm going to listen to this afterwards, obviously being the first podcast ever, and I'm going to be like, wow, this is completely horrible and sounds like shit, but I'm going to go with it, you know what I mean? I want that above anything else, I want that raw, authentic, one take type of thing, which is what I love of free writing. You know what I mean? It's not edited. It's not anything like preconceived or that's probably not even the right word for it, but nothing that you're anticipating to write about. You just like literally let it flow. First thing that comes to your mind, just start writing. Even if like when you start free writing, if you guys, any of you try it, literally sit with a pen and paper in front of you, start writing. I don't know what I'm going to write about. 100 times on the paper, like Bart Simpson or something. And, like continue writing it over and over again. And it's going to start flowing. Like inevitably, almost as if it has to, it's going to start flowing through you. And you're going to start thinking about, different things. And those things that you're thinking, just write them. Because we all think about random shit all the time. And that's a way to get, things out that way. And analyze and interpret. And you might surprise yourself. It's pretty cool. I enjoy it. So that type of rawness is like a similar type of connection with podcasting, the type that I like, at least the type that I want this one to be. Like I was saying, where it's, not going to be edited. It's not going to be, it's going to be the first draft, kind of like the first draft of like something that you write or a school paper or something like that. It's, usually not complete dog shit, there's workable information in there, but, you polish it up, put things in the correct literary form, paragraphs and indent, and, check the grammar and spelling and all that stuff. But before doing all that and printing it all up, it looks like shit, and you write the with the fucking two E's or something, you know what I mean? And this podcast and most of the podcasts that are like that version, the audio or verbal version of free writing, I guess. And that's what I really like about them. That's what resonates with me. But yeah, I'm sure it's not going to be the best in the world, and obviously not. But I'm definitely going to take steps in the direction of improving it. And this is just step one of that journey. Alrighty, and there are a couple more. Just one more point on the whole, authentic podcasting is the only thing I do is pause this recorder thing from time to time to take a sip of water, in case you notice like I don't know, like a break in pitch or something like that, whatever you call it. Or if it sounds like a little differently from 1 second to the next, maybe it's because of that. That's the only thing that I would attribute it to. But I'll tell you when it will sound really different is when you motherfuckers go on the Amazon link on my website and do some shopping and increase the funds of the spuntoday.com website / podcast so that I can buy some respectable SM58 microphones or something like that. Then it'll definitely sound much different. Now, there are a couple more that I want to get through, podcasts that I listen to. I've listed a bunch already, and there's a few more. And I want to get through them within this first episode. Next one is, so I'm going to go a little faster. The next one is the Monday Morning Podcast with Bill Burr. Bill Burr is one amongst comics, is, from what I get, at least like the comic camp that I listen to, I guess you could call him, is like one of the top comedians, one of the top working comedians now in the country. Bill Burr, he's funny as shit. It's called the Monday Morning Podcast. So, as you can guess, it usually comes out Monday mornings, and it's once a week. It's like an hour and a half long. It's similar. Well, I wouldn't dare compare this podcast to that one, but in terms of style of like delivery, I'm as funny as Bill Burr. No, I'm joking. In terms of delivery, in terms of like the podcast style, like it's not like 2 or 3 people like a guest interview type of thing. It's just one person talking, which is Bill Burr. Sometimes he actually has his wife come in. He reads emails. He gets email questions from listeners for life advice. Basically, it could be things like, what do I do about, buying my girl something for her birthday? What should I get her? To, should I join the army? Should, like just random shit. And the problems that people are having. Should I quit my job to go write a book in India? And, he's a funny as fuck stand-up comic. He goes on random, funny, tangent rants, and it's really enjoyable. Definitely check it out. That's the Bill Burr is his name, and it's the Monday Morning Podcast. Then next you have 2, actually, for the price of 1, kind of. It's Dan Carlin's Hardcore History and Common Sense with Dan Carlin. Now, Dan Carlin's Hardcore History is another podcast that he's been on Joe Rogan's podcast, actually, but I think I first heard of it from Joe, like, mentioning it, that he listens to it, and the way he described it sounded cool, so I checked it out, and it is fucking really cool. Dan Carlin he's like this historian dude that he's not a historian dude. He's definitely a historian in my eyes, at least. I don't know if he's like on paper technically or whatever, but he's a journalist by trade, if I'm not mistaken, and he does these like audio type book. It's like if movies had an audio version only, I guess, it would be like that. Like an audiobook is to a book, like this would be to a movie. And he breaks down like certain events in history, like the Holocaust, for example, and he'll have like 3 to 4 hour long parts. Like part 1 would be 3 hours, part 2 would be 4 hours, part 3 would be 4 hours, and just do like a historic telling of what that event is. I don't know if he did one specifically on the Holocaust. Probably did, but I'm not sure. But they're super entertaining. He reminds me of, I remember in college I had, I don't know, like 2 history classes, like those core basic classes that you gotta take. One of the, I don't know, call it History 1 and History 2, which by definition you would think History 2 is harder than History 1. But my experience with it was, for History 1, I had a teacher or a professor that would literally sit in front of the classroom. He wouldn't write shit on the wall. He would just sit down, face the class, open up the textbook, and read from the textbook. No exaggeration, no bullshit. That's what he did every single fucking class that we had. Every single one. It was, and he didn't even have like a fucking entertaining voice, or he didn't sound like the guy that does voiceover for movie previews or something like that. Like, he was just complete dull and boring, and probably what some of you are thinking this podcast sounds like right now, but it was horrible. Point of the story is that I got a D in the class, D as in David, not a B. So it was a dog shit grade, dog shit class, dog shit experience. Then what's my point? In the next class that I took, History 2, I'm like, shit, I got a D in History 1, I'm fucked for History 2. I had the coolest, most enthusiastic, I never liked history before this, until I had this professor. Most enthusiastic, awesome professor. Used to walk around, give you fucking personal attention, I guess, speak to you, you know. It was the type of class environment where you actually felt comfortable. The professor calls on you, you're not like, oh shit, I don't know the answer. Like, you could literally be like, oh, I wasn't paying attention, or you actually were paying attention. That's the thing. I found myself actually paying attention and answering shit, and you know what I mean. Like, it was a really cool, welcoming environment, and I got an A in his class. A is an apple, and I compare his way to teach history, to, at least like entertainment value wise, to Dan Carlin. Like, he engages you. He's like super engaging. That's the word I was looking for, I think. Dan Carlin is, and so is this professor, whose name I wouldn't remember. It was a while ago. But yeah, Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. Definitely check it out. Listen to it. And again, I said earlier, you're getting 2 for the price of 1 in terms of Dan Carlin. He also has this other podcast called Common Sense. He doesn't come out with that one like on any like regular schedule, I don't think. But they're like an hour and a half long also, and it's pretty much the same thing. Not the same thing, completely different content. I guess there's some overlap, but it's a politically driven podcast. It's more about politics and like current events type of thing. But yeah, Dan Carlin, check him out. Hardcore History is one, and Common Sense is the other. They're really good. Next is the Nerdist Writers Panel. That is an awesome podcast. If you like writing, if you like movies, TV shows, comic books, I don't like all of those things, but I do like most, and it's just writing driven, basically. It's a podcast where writers of, famous and current or, recent TV shows, or maybe even older ones, TV show writers and producers and comic book writers and book writers go on and just get blasted with questions of the craft and how'd you do it and what's your process, and really interesting stuff. You get a lot of insight. You get a lot of my favorite part of it, which is removal of the mysticism of it. Like, oh wow, he's a writer, he must have been born with this or learned that, or you know what I mean. And it removes a lot of that type of bullshit and puts you in the mind state of, if you feel like writing, fucking write, and that's it. There's no substitute that mysticism with something else and you'll be all right. So it's really cool to see like that perspective of it. And you have some, I guess, like bougie people that I've heard on it, but for the most part, they seem like regular fucking people, regular folks, which they are. But they're absolutely awesome and great at what they do, and it's inspiring to listen to. I like it. That's the Nerdist Writers Panel. Now the next one is ESPN's Fantasy Focus Football Podcast, which I use for my fantasy football needs. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. If you don't know what fantasy football is, it's not going to make sense. And if you don't know what fantasy football is, you aren't going to be interested in listening to a fantasy football podcast. But if you're into fantasy football, if you play fantasy football at all, if you dabble in it, it's helpful. I've found it helpful. It's with Nate Ravitz and Matthew Berry, ESPN analyst. It's obviously about fantasy football. They speak about matchups and who's going to have a good game based on blah blah blah, who's not going to have a good game, who's injured. Stephanie Bell is a sports doctor that's on the show also periodically, and she speaks about injuries, and this type of ligament tear in the knee usually has a 4 to 6 week recovery time and blah blah blah, stuff like that. So if you need help with your team, which I listen to the podcast, my team is still getting fucking slaughtered. I'm like 1-3 right now, but I enjoy listening to it. They make it fun and interesting, and it's pretty cool. Hey, what's up, guys? What's going on? Sorry for this. Well, it's gonna sound seamless to you guys, but this little interruption. I was listening to the recording for the first ever Spun Today podcast, and I finished recording it last night. Which was Saturday, September 27th, 2014, and while I was reviewing it so I can post it, pretty much I realized that 3/4 of the way through this recording thing, which I'm now not too happy with, cut off basically, and the majority, or like 25% of it, didn't get recorded. So this piece of the recording is taking place the next morning. Today is September 28th, 2014, Sunday, and I'm just pretty much going to finish off with the podcast review as I was doing that you guys were just listening to. So welcome back again to the Spun Today podcast. I am your host, which I also noticed I forgot to let you guys know what the hell my name is. You've been listening to me. If you've been listening for the past half hour or so, you should at least know my name. My name is Tony Ortiz, and again, I am the host of the Spun Today podcast. So where were we? We left off at TYT, the Young Turks. The Young Turks is a online-based news network, and it's a refreshing look at the news, to say the least. It's not filtered, it's not gimmicky, it's not like they curse on it. and it's a refreshing take to me, at least, on the news. There are they have different segments, and they have like a paid subscription service thing, which I'm not into. All of these podcasts that I have mentioned are free. I get enough from the free content that the Young Turks put out. They have a shitload of YouTube videos, different like news segment clips that they put out. But I know you get like 2 hours a day free or something like that, or an hour a day free, audio and video version, and of their podcast. And if you want, their other sections like the sports section, or more in-depth coverage of certain things, I guess you could pay for the paid subscription. They, again, I enjoy listening to them. They have a good group of intelligent, relatable people, newscasters on there. One of which is Cenk Unger. He's the one that started it. He also has this political action committee called Wolfpack. If you guys want to check that out, it's pretty interesting. They have a very, very noble, daunting task or goal of trying to eliminate money from politics. Definitely, I can't articulate the ins and outs of that as well as they can, obviously. So check out wolf-pack.com. It's an interesting concept, and hopefully a successful one sometime down the line in the future. It plays on the ideas, or at least a lot of the ideas, of the book Republic Lost by Lawrence Lessig, Lessig, I believe. The name of the book, Republic Lost. Really great read. Really insightful in terms of the nature or the root of the issue in politics, or American politics at least. So check those out. That's the Young Turks, TYT. Then I have Star Talk Radio. That is with Neil deGrasse Tyson. That's the astrophysicist that I mentioned earlier. He seems like a really cool guy, and he has a way of explaining like the most complicated concepts of science in a very digestible way. Anytime he explains anything from the birth of the universe and the Big Bang to the possibilities or impossibilities of time travel, or stars and supernovas and stuff like that, like I get all that shit like when it's coming from him, you know what I mean, like when he's explaining it. And it's pretty cool. He also fields questions from listeners that submit questions through the social networks, through Twitter, Facebook, and stuff like that. And some of them are like sillier, questions, but that he actually tries to answer in as scientific a way as possible, which is pretty funny. Like, people will ask him something random, like if Marty McFly were to have really come back from the future, would his family have been so different after his father like punched Biff in the face or whatever? Like, is that really possible? And then he'll give you like the scientific explanations of why or why not, you know what I mean, like questions like that. Or more serious questions like climate change and its effect and detriment on the earth, and asteroids and asteroidal impacts, the ice age, and like more serious, obviously, things like that as well. It's an entertaining listen. I recommend that one as well. Then I have the Warrior Poet podcast with Aubrey Marcus. Aubrey Marcus is the CEO of Onnit, ONNIT. That is a supplement and fitness equipment, fitness training videos, and stuff like that type of company. He is the CEO of the company, started the company. Joe Rogan, if I'm not mistaken, he has said that he has a financial stake in the company. They started it together. I'm not his accountant or anything like that, so I don't know to what degree, but it's Aubrey is the CEO of the company. He has his own podcast, which again is the Warrior Poet podcast. He is one of what I like best about Aubrey, or listening to him, at least. He's been on Rogan's podcast a bunch of times also, is that he seems to be like the humblest guest or person of all these podcasts that I listen to. Like super down to earth, super chill kind of dude. Like you get like a really good vibe from him, and I enjoy listening to people like that. He also has had one of the most like not inspiring, but like just like holy shit stories when it comes to his experiences with ayahuasca. Definitely listen to those. Those were pretty cool. Like holy shit, what the fuck type of experiences, at least as accounted by him. So that's another listen. That's the Warrior Poet Project. Next, I have the Adam Carolla Show, known to many as the Pod Father. Although, to me personally, Joe Rogan would be my Pod Father, but Adam Carolla is definitely a pioneer of this. He has been podcasting since like 2005, I want to say, 2005, 2006, something like that. And, he's really funny, really a practical dude, like really practical. And relatable in that way. And he has interesting guests from time to time also. I enjoy listening to his podcast as well. His podcast is one that I actually like listening to at work. I obviously, Spun Today podcast is not paying the bills. I have a regular 9 to 5 cubicle job in the city. And I enjoy, it's the type of podcast that I can listen to while doing my work. Like, it's not distracting, and it's not the type that, I don't want to make it seem like it's like background noise or like filler kind of thing, but, because it's definitely not. But it's the type of podcast that you don't have to listen to intently and, can't be doing anything else. You could definitely, I listen to it at work and enjoy to take it in that way. So check that one out. That is the Adam Carolla Show. Next is the What the Fuck podcast with Mark Maron, the WTF podcast. Mark Maron is another comic out of Boston, if I'm not mistaken. And he's like in a slightly, I guess, like different camp, I guess you can say. Has a different like set of followers than like Joe Rogan and his whole comedy group, but obviously they're within the same profession. There's a lot of overlap. They've been on each other's podcasts and stuff like that. It's just like a different comic basically. It's a cool podcast to listen to. I don't listen to it religiously, I would say. I enjoy his podcasting style. He has a way of opening up his guests to anything. You know what I mean? They like people, go on there and open up. And I listen to it when he has guests that I want to listen to because I've seen him, like on a show or something, and I'm like, oh, I want to see how this person is. Through this medium. Like recently he had Claire Danes on there, the actress. I've seen her on Homeland, and she does like an amazing fucking job on that show. If you guys haven't checked out or have seen Homeland, I think it's on its like second season or something like that. Really good show. Claire Danes does a phenomenal job in that show. And he has, comics and stuff like that on it. And again, I listen to it when there's somebody on there that I want to listen to, and it's pretty cool. That's the WTF podcast with Mark Maron. Then I have Tom Green's podcast. He stopped doing it, or he started doing like a video TV show version of it or something like that. But he had a podcast for a while, and it was pretty good. I enjoyed it. It wasn't like what I thought it would be, like super silly humor, the stigma that Tom Green has attached to his name. It wasn't like that. He had some pretty cool guests on, and it was more of like a serious like interviewing kind of thing, and it was pretty cool. I enjoyed it. What I love the most of his podcast, actually, which, not to take away from the actual content of it, but was his opening like jingle song thing. I thought it was like the coolest, most like awesome one of any podcast that I've ever listened to. So I enjoyed listening to that for whatever it's worth. That's Tom Green Radio. Then I have the This American Life podcast, which is very cool podcast. It's like it's broken up into 3 segments usually, or 3 stories, and they're like mini documentary style stories of just random things. Sometimes the 3 things are related to each other, sometimes they're not, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. It's definitely worth checking out. That is the This American Life podcast with their host, Ira Glass. The next one I listen to is Good Times with Steve Simone. Steve Simone is another stand-up comic who has this podcast, which is really cool. He is another person that comes off to me as super humble, super grounded, really, really genuine. You know what I mean? Like the type of person that's not like speaking with you. At least from his interaction with his guests that I see, he's like really into their conversations, like for real. Not like I'm listening to you because just because we're talking kind of thing, and but not because I'm necessarily interested in what the fuck you're saying. He definitely doesn't have that type of vibe. I enjoy listening to it. Also, what's really cool about his podcast is that he tries to gear the conversation towards the good times that guests have had when they were like children, basically. Like, think about riding your bike outside until it gets dark, type of thing. Falling down, scraping your knee, wrestling with your brothers or whatever, climbing trees and shit like that, fresh cut grass. Stuff like that makes you reminisce and remember the good times of the past. So it's pretty cool. And he tries to get his guests like into that mind state. And I think it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool take on podcasting. But of course, that's not the only thing they speak about. He's a stand-up comic. They have comics on there, and he's had childhood friends, I believe. And it's pretty cool. I've listened to a bunch of them. Probably not all, but almost all of his episodes. It's a fairly new podcast, so you guys can catch up quick on that one also. Check it out. That is Good Times with Steve Simone. The next one I listen to is the Burtcast. That is with comedian Bert Kreischer. Bert.com, I believe it's his website. And he's funny as shit. He's a comic also that is known to be, I guess, like the party comic, the frat guy, fraternity comic. He has like that I guess stigma or whatever attached to his name. Seems like a really fun, cool dude. Really enjoyable also. Humble cat, and he has a lot of pretty cool guests also. One of my favorite interviews that he's done is with comedian Miss Pat, which has also been on Ari's podcast, Rogan's podcast, Joey Diaz's The Church of What's Happening Now podcast. But I think she first appeared on, like, within that little circuit on Bert Kreischer's podcast, the Burtcast. And it was pretty funny. But the best interview out of all 4 was the one that I actually heard first, which was on Ari Shaffir's Skeptic Tank. That was an ill podcast. Definitely listen to that one, guys. That's with comedian Miss Pat. And again, that is the Burtcast. The next one that I have, and we only have a couple more, guys. So we're almost at the end. For those of you that are like, holy shit, how many podcasts do you actually fucking listen to? There's only a couple more. The next one is the Nerdist podcast. This is their regular one. It's not like the Nerdist Writers Panel, which is really good also. I enjoy listening to them. But it's another podcast I listen to, again, when there are guests that I like or that I want to listen to. Familiar names, I guess, that I've heard or seen or am interested in for whatever reason. But every time I do listen to any of them, I really enjoy them. They do a good job on that one. That's the Nerdist podcast. Then another one that I recently started listening to, and I've listened to almost all of the episodes, not all of them, but it's a fairly new podcast. It has like half a dozen, 6, 7 episodes, something like that. Is Bad for Business. Bad, the number 4, Business, with Jerry Ferrara, which is the actor best known for Entourage. He was Turtle on Entourage, if any of you guys have seen the HBO show. And it's pretty cool. He loves podcasts as well, clearly, as you can tell from listening to an episode or two of his show. And he had like this childhood dream of being on the radio or something like that. So this is like an excellent play into quenching that thirst, if you will. That's called the Bad for Business podcast with Jerry Ferrara. Next, I have Radiolab, which is a podcast that's similar to me, anyway, similar to This American Life. Except it's not broken down into like 3 segments or 3 different things. I think it's usually just one, but it's that documentary audio type style of a show, where they have like one specific topic that they're speaking of. Like let's say they add special effects and stuff like that. But not like cheesy stuff. Pretty cool, interesting sounding things. Like if they're speaking about outer space, they'll put the sound of a shooting star or some shit like that. Whatever a shooting star sounds like. But it's pretty cool. It's not it's not cheesy or anything like that. It's things that complement the content that they're speaking about, and they do it very well. Now I have just 2 more. One of which is the Mental Illness Happy Hour. It's with the host Paul Gilman. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's geared towards mental illness and like depression and stuff like that. The different guests that are on there get into their troubles when it comes to that, and just speak about it in a pretty open way, which is cool. It's refreshing. Paul Gilman definitely has a way of opening up his guests as well into that realm, and you get like an introspective kind of, or an insight rather, to these people. And I listened to a bunch of episodes. I've liked each one, and again, I've listened to the ones that have guests that I've heard of or that I wanted to know more about, comics that I was already familiar with, and it's pretty cool. I recommend that one also. It was recommended to me actually by my brother, and it turned out to be a pretty good podcast. I enjoy it. That is the Mental Illness Happy Hour. And lastly on my list here is Talk Nerdy to Me with Cara Santamaria. Cara Santamaria, I first heard her on Joe Rogan's podcast. She's one of those guests that I found interesting enough to look up their podcast, and she literally just started it. If I'm not mistaken, she has 2 or 3 episodes. The first episode of which is with Joe Rogan, so it's definitely a great listen. And she is a scientist, and she was a column writer for the Huffington Post. Not sure if she still is. I don't think she is. And it's really interesting. Super smart person. Again, explains things similar to how Neil deGrasse Tyson does, in a no bullshit kind of way, but in a very digestible way. It doesn't sound like a human textbook or something like that. So it's pretty cool. Definitely check that one out. That is Talk Nerdy to Me with Cara Santamaria. And that's pretty much it, guys. That's the show. So definitely reach out to me. Also, let me know if there are any podcasts that you listen to that you think I might enjoy. I'll definitely check them out. Again, I always love listening to new stuff. Check out any of the ones that I mentioned here that sound like they might be somewhat interesting to you guys. Hit me up. Let me know if there's certain episodes that you like, the ones that you did hear me speak about that you already are listening to. Talking about your favorite episodes, stuff like that. That'd be pretty cool. Get like a little dialogue going back and forth like that. And in closing, I'm working on a closing statement in process, or a work in progress rather, which is substitute the mysticism with hard work and start taking steps in the general direction of your dreams. Thanks for listening, guys.